we are live. My name is John-Paul Berg, and I just realized that I had queued up the absolute wrong intro. This is The Way Forward, not Social Credit Voices. That's Wednesdays at 7 p.m., so I do apologize. We're off to a great start. Today, we will be discussing inflation from a Douglas social credit standpoint. So with that said, I'll throw it right over to you, Oliver, to get us started on this topic.
Well, we should begin by defining what inflation is, this problem of inflation. And we're talking, of course, about price inflation. So people will notice that over time, let's say over the course of many years, decades, there is a constant tendency for things in general to become more expensive, right? And there's some exceptions, but if you look at what it costs to live, the cost of living tends to increase over time. So much so that what $1 would buy, what it could have bought, let's say in 1926, perhaps you need 20 or 30 or $40 or $50 to buy the same goods in 2026. So that whole process is this phenomenon of inflation. And there are different ideas about what's causing this. There are generally, two categories of inflation that people recognize. There's demand pull, and then there's cost push. And most people, when they think of inflation, the standard narrative is that there's too much money chasing too few goods. So whenever the money supply expands, then automatically it's thought by many that this must result in inflation, and therefore it's the constant expansion of the money supply that is the fundamental flaw in the system that's driving inflation. So there's a post that I came across just today on Twitter, which if you can pull that up and read it, JP, we can use that as our point of departure.
So this is from Mr. Bruce Fenton, and it's don't blame baby boomers because they could buy houses for 20K and pay for college with a summer job. Blame the politicians who printed money from thin air for half a century to fund expansion of government, war, and grift. The money is broken. Fix the money, fix the world.
So my first comment on that is he seems to have stolen one of our slogans or one of our taglines: "Fix finance, fix the world." But that's all right. He's spreading that part of the message. But what's problematic about this explanation is you have this idea, which many people accept. It's kind of out there in the ether, that it's the government that is printing money, and that this is what's driving inflation. And I'll say two things about that initially. One is that currency, legal tender, physical notes and coins, this is a very small part of the money supply, 5% or less, let's say, in Canada. It's a bit more in the US. But when it comes to, printing money, the contribution that money printing in the literal sense would make to the expansion of the money supply is really very, very limited. You're talking maybe only like 2, 3, 4% of the monetary increase in any year would be due to a government literally printing notes or minting coins. And if you talk about money printing in a figurative sense, where you've got some form of state-mediated credit creation, the bulk of the money supply, of course, exists in the form of bank credit. It's intangible. The banks create it whenever they make a loan or a purchase. That form of figurative money printing, because it's driven by the government and the state, that would, in normal times, maybe account for 10, 15, 20% of the monetary expansion. So it's the case that when the money supply expands, most of it is actually driven not by the government, but by the action of private banks whenever they make loans or purchases, purchase securities, etc., quite apart from anything the government's doing. So this the picture that's painted in this particular post, it's quite misleading. And there's much more. I'll come back to this later, but for now, I just want to point out that most of the money supply exists in the form of bank credit, and the expansion of the money supply that occurs year on year, most of that is not driven by the state or the government at all. It's driven by the private decisions of the banking system.
So essentially what you're saying is he's right in the sense that it is this creation of money, but it's not the government doing it, it's private institutions.
It's private institutions, but also this monetary expansion is not the main cause of inflation. It can result in inflation. I mean, demand pull is a phenomenon that exists, but even when it comes to the relationship between this monetary expansion and inflation, the relationship is not what he thinks it is, and we'll discuss that a little later.
Okay, Andre, I'm going to throw it right over to you. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I'm a philosopher, but I always ask quite hard questions that I cannot answer. In a balanced society, why do we have inflation? Why, with the technology we possess, actually, we don't experience deflation, a constant decrease in price due to innovation, automatization, knowledge, and wisdom? I think that inflation in economics is a term that was borrowed in physics. When you go back with the definition of the word inflation, it is related to a physical phenomenon. It comes from the Latin inflatus, and it was observed by many scientists at the time. You know, you inflate a balloon, you put the hair, or you create vacuum in a jar. The word inflation in economy arrived around 1800, a little bit earlier, a little bit later, depending on the historian. What is quite interesting, it arrived exactly after the French Revolution, or we would say the monetizing of the economic system. And we were using this word inflation to explain the increase in price, like Oliver mentioned. But it's not enough. In a society that is stable and balanced, you should neither have inflation or deflation. You should have a balance between the cost of production and the income for consumption. It should be equal. It is not normal that we are impoverished, that we are being impoverished year after year after year. I will just make a small comment about the baby boomers or the boomers. It's a very bad habit for people to put other people in categories. It's not a question of boomers. It's not a question of Gen Z. It's a question of who controls the monetary policy or the monopoly of credit. Maybe we will talk later about the monopoly of credit. But the last thing I want to say is that word inflation arrived at the same time as the word revolution. Revolution was used in astronomy, and until 1800, it was never used in politics. Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Human Condition, described this as a way to destabilize society. A revolution always destabilizes society. Inflation destabilizes people because people have to struggle either to work more to cover this gap that we always talk about with different origin or different factors. But if you don't have inflation, and especially in a world, technological world where we should see price decrease, in a classical capitalism, you produce more, the price of the good and service should decrease, but it's not what is happening. We're always seeing an increase in price, and it is not only because there's too much money that is in circulation. You have flaws directly in the system. Oliver explained it all the time, and I think we have to be able to identify all those symptoms to be able to draw a good diagnosis.
The fact, like you say, that we don't see the opposite of this, it kind of disproves the theory, because you would assume that obviously it wouldn't just simply go in one direction if that was the causation. So it's kind of like that disproves that theory entirely. There's obviously other factors that are driving this. What are your thoughts, Oliver?
So when it comes to expanding the money supply, uh, again, it's assumed by many that this is necessarily ipso facto inflationary because you expand the money supply and then you've got too much money chasing too few goods, and so retailers raise their prices. But, if the new money is spent on additional production, then the underlying assumption there doesn't hold because yes, there's more money, but there's also more production. So in that case, you wouldn't expect automatic demand pull inflation. But beyond that, it is true that the expansion of the money supply could, under certain circumstances, result in demand pull inflation. But on the Douglas social credit analysis, C.H. Douglas basically said that the primary driver of inflation is not demand pull, it is cost push. Why? Because you've got this structural deficit, right? This built-in deficit where whatever you're producing in the course of a certain period, costs and prices are being built up, they're being generated, and incomes are being distributed at the same time. But the rates of flow are not in equilibrium, not automatically. So there's this recurring underlying deficiency of consumer buying power, what we call the gap. And the main way of filling that under the existing system is to rely on some economic actor, the government, businesses, consumers, to borrow more money into existence from the banking system, right? So you're going to try to fill the gap with an injection of debt money. And what happens is in the next economic period, you're going to have to start servicing those debts, right? So a simple example would be, let's say consumers don't have enough money from wages and salaries to buy back what the system has produced, not automatically. So they go and they get lines of credit, credit cards, student loans, car loans, etc. So they're borrowing additional money into existence from the banking system. In the next economic period, not only do they have to fill the gap which reappears for that period, but they've got to start servicing these debts that they have contracted. So that means that they have to start paying down the principal and also the interest. And this depletes the amount of disposable income they have for goods and services. So they're not able to maintain the same standard of living. And they still have a gap that they've got to fill somehow. So the artificial financial pressure increases. Then, of course, the natural thing is to go to the employer or to the government and say, we can't meet ends. We can't make ends meet like this. So we need wage increases. We need a salary increase, right? And so, maybe the government raises the minimum wage or there's a cost of living adjustment. And people then start to earn a bit more, which helps them to get by, and it sort of inflates away past debts. But those are new costs, and they're going to filter into the system in the next period as increased costs. And so, increased wages, increased salaries end up being increased costs, which then means increased prices, right? And then the system sort of repeats itself over and over again. So you've got a debt, wage, price spiral. Right? And Douglas says this is what is really driving constant inflation. It's true that if you, for example, if governments deficit spend and they spend too much money, it is possible to overshoot the gap. So you can explain demand pull inflation as well on a Douglas social credit analysis. But Douglas is saying that even if you don't overshoot the gap, you always have this phenomenon of cost push inflation that's operating in the background. And we tolerate it because it's one way of keeping the system going. The debts that were incurred in 1960 pale in comparison now because of inflation, right? Like what's $40 billion or $200 billion compared with $2 trillion. So this is one way in which the system manages to keep it all going. We'll just inflate away past debts, and we pay for that, of course, in inflation. We might add that inflation is not a good thing, because if you've got savings, you're losing purchasing power. If you're on a fixed income, you're losing purchasing power. And it's rather destabilizing, because you don't know exactly what things are going to cost in the future. So it makes it more difficult to make plans.
So it's essentially like a Band-Aid solution. Like we print money to inject liquidity, or to inject a debt money into the system to fill the gap. And then that overall has like a positive feedback loop, and we're just kicking the can down the road. And it's almost like akin to a Ponzi scheme. And it seems like we're to a point now where it's so destabilized that it's barely holding together. It's seemingly so precarious.
Yeah,
So
that's accurate.
with that said, Andre, I will pass it over to you. But before I do, I want to ask the audience. We have about 50 people watching, which is pretty good for 15 minutes in. If I could get you all to share it, maybe we could get up to 100. So with that said, Andre, what are your thoughts on this?
First of all, two things. The first thing is Adam Smith's published The Wealth of Nation. I had to go back to the text, and I went back to the interpretation of Michael Jones and Baron Metal. He published this in 1776. I still don't see wealth nowhere. We have wealth. Somebody has wealth. $450 million yacht for Mr. Zuckerberg when he's on his yacht, but we have to tighten our belt because we're creating climate change. We have to lower our temperature. I don't see wealth, or I don't see wealth well distributed. And I think the convergence between the Douglas social credit doctrine and the distributist people were interesting in a sense. In the book of Oliver Lives of Our Own, he's describing convergence, but also the differences. That's the first thing. The second thing is this wealth. It's our world heritage. Because it's not well distributed. Let's say tomorrow I start a new company. I need funding. And this, like Oliver mentioned, it is cost. You have to integrate those costs. I need factory, I need worker, I need infrastructure. Can I have a loan? Debt-free credit? Can I have a loan? And can I put in guarantee the assets, my share of the world heritage? No bank, no private bank will say, well, I will put in assets, how do you call it? Collateral, let's say the Joconde in France. We say, what do you mean the Joconde? You don't own the painting? Yes, I do. It's supposed to be a common property for the entire humanity. There's one thing that I've discovered. Google are buying old manuscript. What they're doing, they're digitizing those manuscripts, and after that, they're destroying them. Funny, because it's the world heritage, and they're destroying the world heritage. Why they do this? I discovered, and I think that inflation is a weapon. Inflation is a weapon for political control. If you want to control people in a way, you will create inflation. Either you will raise, like Oliver was mentioning, the minimum salary, or you will kneel down to a union demand. But you know what you're doing. You know that you will push those costs, and that's why Oliver is right. You push those costs forward. It's not the way forward like we want to emphasize, but they push the cost forward. If you borrow money today, you'll have to pay back tomorrow, unless it's debt-free credit. And if you have this debt-free credit, it still has a price. You need an increase in production. If you use, let's say I built a company with AI to algorithm tomorrow, I have to prove that I will increase the production for the entire population. This is not what we're seeing. The wealth of nation exists only for 1% of the population. And up to a certain point, the system works. War, creative destruction. War will destroy goods and services, will create full employment, and we'll start over again, and we reset the system every 40, 50 years. because after 40, 50 years, the debts are not sustainable. We are not in a system that works. And I challenge any economist to come and explain to me in lay terms, in simple terms, why their system is working with fact, empirical fact, and not just ideology like many people do.
Well, I definitely don't think it's working for us, but it's working for them. It's working for
It is not. It is
that
not.
very small percentage that like I say, the deficiency in purchasing power, that was a bug to CH Douglas, but to the people that are exploiting it, it's very much a feature that they're utilizing to keep us enslaved, essentially. So
Well,
before
it's if I can just add, it is we feel it. They don't.
that's for sure. That's for sure. Before I throw it over to Oliver, I just want to let everyone know if you have any questions, like this is episode 9 now. We're into more advanced aspects of this. And we know that for a lot of people, you're encountering this for the first time. Don't be hesitant. Please note there's no bad questions, and we will address every question towards the end of the show. So I just want to encourage you, like, ask some questions. Try to understand this a little bit. And with that said, I'll throw it over to you, Oliver.
Well, Andre was mentioning something quite interesting, which is sort of the use of inflation as a political tool. And apart from it sort of being a functional necessity of the existing dysfunctional system, to keep kicking the can down the road and inflate past debt away, it also acts as an artificial financial pressure to keep people engaged in the system, right? You can't very easily say, well, I'm just going to live off my savings if your savings are being inflated away with the passage of time. So it's, you either have a pension that's indexed to inflation, or you've got to stay on the treadmill. You've got to keep participating in the system because if you don't, you'll fall behind. And this even affects things like investments. If you just wanted to put your money in a bank at the low rate of interest, typically, that you might receive on a bank account, it's not going to be enough to keep pace with inflation. So it forces people to then say, oh, maybe I've got to invest the money in something, or I've got to open a business, or some people I know, for example, bought a small apartment as an investment, and they rent it out. They don't live in it. And from our point of view, which is not a Whig point of view, it's our purpose on this planet is not to try to keep pace with inflation, and so a lot of people's time and energy and their policy is basically becomes a function of money is scarce, it's losing value, we've got to keep running after it in 1,001 different ways, and this is another form of waste and sabotage. But I wanted to underline, and we'll probably show the video shortly from the animated series. Wanted to underline that inflation is one of the common objections, that people raise when it comes to Douglas's remedial proposals. And it's very important to understand that not only would the Douglas monetary reform, not only would it not be inflationary if it's done properly, it actually would be anti-inflationary, because first off, you have to measure the gap. You have to determine how much additional money is necessary to balance the flow of incomes with the flow of costs and prices. And if you do that accurately, then there's going to be no danger of demand pull inflation, right? You won't be injecting too much money. You'll just be injecting the right amount. And the other half of that is that the kind of money that would be used to fill the gap in Douglas social credit is credit that is not attached to any additional debt, right? So it doesn't have to be repaid directly to the issuing authority, which would be the National Credit Office. So it's an injection of money, yes, but a very different kind of money that, when it's used to pay down production debts, is going to cancel those production debts and itself out of existence. And it's not creating this need then in a future period to service debts. And if you remove that artificial pressure to have to service debts and then to have to, have wage and salary increases to maintain the standard of living, if you remove that dynamic, then you're also removing the cost push inflation, which is a feature of the existing system. So it's a very beautiful, elegant sort of a solution. We're making the financial system truly self-liquidating for the first time, where there's enough buying power to liquidate the costs of production, and we're not borrowing from the future in order to meet past costs. Right. So we say it's not just that it's not going to be inflationary in the sense of demand pull, but it gets to the root of what's causing most of the inflation under the existing system, namely the cost push through the debt wage price spiral.
Makes sense. So I want to touch on something you kind of touched upon yourself there. It's like the premise that we're supposed to serve this abstract free market. And that's why we're here, to chase GDP growth and to chase this and constantly perpetuate it. And that's just not it. In a Douglas social credit system, and I think in classic conservatism or classic Toryism, to contrast with the Whiggism, it's the economic system should serve people primarily. That's the whole reason we're doing this. That's why we have economic association, is to deliver goods and services to people. So once we've gotten beyond that, I mean, it's no wonder it's not reflecting reality, because it's not doing what it's intended to do, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. The system as it's set up now, it makes us serve the system, right? Money becomes master, monetary demands become the controlling force, the determining force. And we want to invert that entirely and create a system where money is just a tool, a neutral tool that enables us to do what is physically possible, right? The money and the money system should serve people. The economy should serve people. People should not be enslaved or forced to worship at the altar of Mammon, which is how the current system is set up.
So presently, the so-called left and the so-called right are both pushing like a Whig style economic policy. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Whiggism is at the heart of the whole problem. And because Whiggism creates so much, gross inequality, exploitation, servility, that's why socialism and communism arise as a reaction to the inhuman character of the Whig system. And then you've got, fascism and National Socialism that often arise as a counter reaction to the socialism and communism. So it's an interesting exercise, but if you look at commentators online, apart from, let's say, anarchists, you can probably categorize everybody into one of those three categories. They're either a Whig, a socialist/communist, or a fascist/national socialist. From a Douglas social credit point of view, they are all collectivistic. They're all subordinating the individual to the group. And what we want to do is to flip that on its head. Institutions, group association exist to serve the common interest of individuals, right? And so this is a radically different policy based on a radically different philosophy.
Very interesting. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Andre, to make some comments, and then we'll bring up the video and go from there.
Oliver was mentioning people either from the left or the right, they're weaponized. Many people, they don't understand. And you know what? Many people, including me, don't understand economy. I have to make a big effort because thank God I did not study economy in university. I'm quite happy today that I studied literature, so I can read. But do I follow the Milton Friedman system, or the Keynesian system, or the Hamiltonian system, which I discovered last week? It's what is it? Those systems, and I was always asking myself why we always have this gap. And the question was, why would I leave a debt to my children, to my daughter? I was supposed to be more rich. How come I leave a debt? Some people, they don't. The Rothschild, they don't leave debt to their children. They leave power and control. That's why I said inflation is a tool. And when Oliver was mentioning this afternoon, when I was preparing the show, I wrote this phrase. I said, people, because they cannot criticize, but since everyone is a function of the system, they cannot criticize or understand that inflation is not an inherent economic mechanism, but an instrument of control. And when we are controlled by our emotion, what do? We react. If you lower my wages, or you deprive my pension, or I become poor, one day I will arrive at the tipping point where I'll start to become socialist. Not in a good sense. Socialist as a way to protest against inequalities. And most people, they fall in those traps because of their condition. For example, if I take a snapshot of our personal finance, you, John-Paul, Oliver, and me, or everybody, and you say, okay, let's take a snapshot. Who's happy? You will have a lot of people who will say that they are not happy. You will have a lot of people who will not answer. Zuckerberg, Musk, they will not answer because they're not concerned. They never have to deal about scarcity, anxiety, because it's out of their mind. But for ordinary people, and even up to a certain point, imagine two people, a man and a woman, they make, let's say, $150,000, $200,000 per year. You say that's a lot of money, and they have a big mortgage. But suddenly, one is just fired or laid off for a reason, and suddenly the mortgage becomes unsustainable. So they're always afraid to be kicked out of the system. So that's why they comply. They can never criticize. Why some people have real free speech, because they're above this fear. They can just criticize. And I can give an example. I think it was a popular singer in the United States 3-4 years ago. He was just bankrupt by a system. The system crushed him because he was going against it. And I think Oliver mentioned something, pray to Mammon. We don't want to pray to Mammon. Money is supposed to be a tool, period, nothing else. I will just make a comment, quick comment. I think Mr. Ascari is in the audience. I will offer him to pay my next tie if he chooses it. So at least after that, he will maybe criticize my shirt.
That's right. He certainly couldn't criticize you the tie if he got it. He actually posted a question there, just since it's relevant. We're not at the question portion, but I'm going to bring it up right now. He's directed it towards you, Andre, but I want Oliver to answer it too, because you indicated you just recently learned of Hamiltonian economics, and I'm curious to the answer. So what is your view on a Hamiltonian economic system, Andre?
Well, I just discovered that, and I told myself, okay, compare this to Keynesian or Hamiltonian. It's I don't remember exactly its name. Hamilton, who was an economist, he created a system where you drive economic policy, if I'm not wrong, with big public spending, and then after that, you say, okay, the government is money is project manager. So up to a certain point, you can say why the government is involved in this, why it's not private companies, why private company, they don't have an environment where it is facilitated for them to start a business. I don't have enough money to start a business, but I have a great idea. So that's why usually I go on the public market to finance my idea, to have to be able to create a factory. So you have some good aspect in this system. But when they make it, when they make it a cult, or it's something that you cannot get out of it, this is where I disagree. Monopoly of an idea, it's as bad as monopoly of credit. You have to be able to challenge those ideas. And I see all those classical economists, they don't want to challenge those new ideas like the system of Douglas, but because they benefit from the actual system. I think up to a certain point, we have to be able to challenge those ideas. Else, there's no debate.
I initially discovered Hamiltonian economics through the writings of Matt Ehret. And I thought, compared to our present system, it's superior to our present
Yes.
system. But at further learning and learning of Douglas social credit, I find this vastly superior. And one of the biggest reasons is they're still stuck in the job model, like income tied directly to work exclusively. So that's like, if that's the best we can do, guys, like, hey, you're all still going to be enslaved, but there'll be lots of options for various enslavement. You know what I mean? And people might say, "Oh, you're being utopianistic. You're being idealistic." I don't think I am. I simply want a system that serves me, that I am not subject to or subjugated by. I don't think that's a utopian ideal to want that much more. The prison we live in modernity is this sense that just because things are a certain way, they have to be that way and we can't change them. And I think learning of Douglas social credit doesn't just show people that we could change them, we can make this dramatically better. So what is your view on Hamiltonian economics, Oliver? I'm sure you're more familiar than we are with it.
Yeah, well, Hamiltonian economics, I would say, as I understand it, is just a version of the dirigiste economy, where the government slash state is, for example, you've got protectionistic policies, and then you're backing certain industries in the economy. So it's sort of a state capitalism. It's basically Keynesianism, except why do they call it Hamiltonian economics? Because if they called it Keynesianism, a lot of people wouldn't support it, right? But I think it's just Keynesianism 2.0, a variation on a theme. And it's interesting that we've had 30, 40 years of neoliberalism ideologically, to the extent that that's actually been applied. Of course, it's only been a partial application. Deregulation, privatization, all that sort of stuff. And it seems that now they want to swing the pendulum back in a Keynesian direction. And it's an economic system where basically the government occupies the commanding heights. So if you compare that with, let's say, with Douglas social credit, there certainly are things that the government should be involved in. Like we don't want to outsource national defense to the market, right? So there are certain public goods and services that should be produced and produced well. But I suppose some of the advantages of the Hamiltonian system relative to the present system are basically what you were mentioning, John-Paul, that in fact, without admitting it, they are using government production, goods and services, maybe the government is the employer of last resort, to fill the gap with government activity and to ensure that everyone's got jobs, especially in an era of increasing automation and AI and this sort of thing. And if you simply reform the monetary system to reflect reality accurately, we can fill the gap through the dividend and the discount, enfranchising the individual without requiring him to engage in pyramid building, to speak metaphorically, or to in order to get his money tickets, he's got to relinquish control of his own policy and do what the government slash state thinks he should be doing in exchange for his money token. So Douglas social credit, to speak in conventional terms, would be to the right of Hamiltonian economics without being, laissez-faire capitalism.
Very good answer. So with that said, we're going to bring the video up and play the video, and then we'll do a round of comments on it. I do want to appeal to the audience. We have about 80 people watching. If you guys could please share the stream, it's very advantageous. And I would like to appeal to you guys to ask some questions. Again, I understand a lot of you are just encountering this for the first time. Don't hesitate asking any question. There is no bad question. Yeah, please interact. So with that said, I'm going to bring this video up and play it.
Episode 18, Social Credit and Inflation. We are often told that if the government were to create its own money and then spend it into the economy, this would cause inflation. But what if this isn't necessarily true? According to the social credit proposals of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, it is possible for the government or state body to inject its own money into the economy without causing any inflation whatsoever. As far as the social credit proposals are concerned, the creation and injection of a supplementary flow of consumer buying power by a national credit authority would not be inflationary for four main reasons. Firstly, the total volume of compensatory consumer credit, which would be distributed to the consumer in the form of the national dividend or on his behalf in the form of the compensated price discount, would be carefully calculated to ensure that the price-income gap is exactly filled, not a penny less nor a penny more. In other words, so long as the gap is not overshot with too much money when attempting to fill it, no global or systemic demand pull inflation could result. Secondly, it is vital to understand that the consumer credits issued through the national dividend and the compensated price discount mechanisms are to be issued in lieu of all of the contemporary methods which the existing financial system employs in attempting to fill the price-income gap. Consider common palliatives such as exporting more than you import, excessive economic growth, especially growth involving capital production, excessive government spending on public production, including warfare, alongside intrusive regulatory interventions, and the granting of consumer loans involving the creation of additional credit. All of these would have to be eliminated in a social credit commonwealth. So long as the conventional methods of gap management can be prohibited, there would again be no danger of too much money being created to chase too few goods. Thirdly, it is likewise important to understand that the compensatory consumer credits received by retailers in payment of goods and services would be either destroyed in repayment of the retailer's operating lines of credit or else used to replace the stock of working capital. In the latter case, it would only ever be reissued to consumers as incomes alongside a new set of costs. There is therefore no danger that the supplementary consumer credits would pile up and thereby provoke demand inflation. Fourthly and finally, as part of the compensated price mechanism, Douglas suggested a final measure to ensure that no localized inflation could take place either. All retail businesses would have to agree to a fixed percentage of profit on turnover, as is deemed equitable for the business in question, if they wish to be eligible for the compensated price discount program. This would prevent companies from arbitrarily raising prices for products in high demand just because there would be more money about in consumer pockets. As a matter of fact, not only would the social credit measures not be inflationary, they would be anti-inflationary. For the most significant form of inflation is not demand pull, but rather the cost push inflation, which is caused by the systemic effects of excessive debt in our debt money financial system. If the flow of prices exceeds the flow of incomes, and the only way to fill that gap under the current system is by borrowing more and more money into existence as debt, you can only meet debt claims by incurring more debt. But because these debts eventually have to be paid off, more and more consumer income is diverted to servicing them. To maintain the standard of living, people then demand wage and salary increases, which eventually filter into price increases in a never-ending wage-price spiral. By filling the gap with debt-free consumer credits, the social credit measures put an end to the unprovided-for costs in the price structure of goods and services once and for all, rather than transforming them into additional debt burdens that have to be paid at a future point in time. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit.
So I'll throw it right over to you, Oliver, and you can expand upon that a little bit.
One thing that is mentioned in the video that we haven't talked about yet is the fact that when we fill the gap under social credit with debt-free compensatory consumer credit, right, through the dividend and the discount, at the same time, of course, we're going to eliminate all the palliatives which we currently rely on to fill the gap. So, excessive government deficit spending, business expansion that's not really required in terms of the real domestic demand, and consumer loans involving the creation of new money, as well as favorable trade balances, trying to export more than you import. All of these things would have to cease because, of course, if you allowed them to continue, there would be inflation. So in a sense, where it's not so much that we're creating more money, but we're creating a different kind of money free of debt, in order to balance the system. And we're doing it in lieu of all the existing palliatives. And so this is another reason why the Douglas social credit measures would not be inflationary.
And what are your thoughts on this, Andre?
We always go back to those classical tools to either to beat the inflation. Oliver was mentioning earlier, we try to beat the inflation. I will buy a hammer and I will try to find the inflation. I will beat the inflation. Meaning, what is this? Why do I have to compete with an ideology? Inflation should not exist in a world where you have a good moral code, moral rules, and you wouldn't even have speculation. If you produce more goods and you have a lot of money that is in circulation, you will have people, if they don't have moral law, moral code, you'll have people who will start to be greedy, or they will speculate. We see this all the time. The idea also with a system like the system of Douglas is to have also a very solid moral structure. That's what we lost in the last maybe 100 years or so. And up to a certain point, you have a government, or not just a government, private entities, they play with those concepts to manipulate people. The idea of the gap, I think, is central. If you produce something, if we're very wealthy in the society, we produce everything we need and we consume everything we need. We don't create pollution. We are sustainable. Let's say your population is growing because you have a good birth rate. You will need to produce more. So most probably you will create this gap. The system should compensate this gap with free credit money, which is, no usury. Why do we have interest rate? I am an advocate of interest rate in the sense of what is it to share the risk. If Oliver lends me money and I always spend it on booze instead of, something that is productive, one day he will say, Andre, sorry, next time I will lend you money with an interest because you don't know how to manage your money. The interest rate should be a way to should be a mechanism and not a tool to subjugate people. This is why the debt-free credit is essential, because you do not borrow money that your children will have to repay in 20 years. And then what they will do? They will go on your grave and they will just hate you for the rest of their life. This is not a way to sustain the society. I think in our world, we're supposed to be clever enough and moral enough to take our fair share of the goods that the society produce. But up to a certain point, the absence of moral today, and I go back to the $400 million yak of Zuckerberg. The ruling class always advocate for modesty, and let's just pray. Per example, they should start first, and then we can follow them. I'm pretty sure I will become a trillionaire tomorrow, because I bet they will never do it.
It's kind of interesting how all of these billionaires are suddenly embracing libertarianism, isn't it? Like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, they're advocating for libertarianism, and it's obvious as to why, because they would dominate under that type of a deregulated system. Like it's going to serve them far better than it would serve the people. That's for sure. So unfortunately, gentlemen, we don't have very many questions whatsoever. So we're going to just have to continue discussing it. With that said, Oliver, what do you have any more thoughts to add on the topic?
Well, this might be a bit premature since we're not yet at the end of the show, but I was thinking, tonight we're talking about inflation and how Douglas social credit would address inflation and solve the problem of inflation. And we've talked in previous episodes, we've talked about taxation, how taxation would be restructured and greatly reduced. So, DSC addresses the taxation issue. We've talked about trade wars and how the existing financial system induces conflict between countries as each country tries to export more than it imports, and that this can degenerate into military conflict and war, and how Douglas social credit, by balancing each national economy endogenously, making the financial system self-liquidating, would also solve that particular problem and remove the impetus to most modern warfare. And we've talked about the automation, AI, tech labor displacement issue. And we see how, again, the Douglas social credit monetary reform addresses that through the dividend and the discount, and enabling us to replace a outmoded policy of full employment with a policy of the minimum employment necessary. So there's so many problems that are solved by it. That's just a short list, right? But it's important for people to understand that this is not a system that's focused only on somebody's pet problem or pet issue. It resolves so many things simultaneously, because I think it gets to the core issue, the core problem with the economy. So if you address the problem at the level of the cause, the primary cause, then the symptoms naturally necessarily disappear. It's like treating somebody's disease, right? You can have all these Band-Aid solutions, which might offer some relief, but then a lot of times they cause other problems. Or you can find what the core cause is, address that adequately, and the symptoms disappear, because the symptoms are of course downstream from the cause. And so no matter what one's major financial or economic concern is, Douglas social credit offers an answer. And that's one of the reasons why historically it attracted people from all ends of the conventional political economic spectra, right? From the left and from the right and from the center, because it's based on truth and it's based on natural law, the logos. And so it has the capacity to resolve conflict.
It's crazy. Everything comes back to the gap. This deficiency of purchasing power. That's like the main causational factor for all of these other societal ills that are indirectly caused by it. And what's really strange about this is most conventional economists, they don't even acknowledge that it exists entirely. You know what I mean? So it's like that's how far from the plot we are. Do you have any?
The easiest way, if you want to run the experiment and prove that it exists, just say, from tomorrow onwards, let's say the government tells all the banks, you will no longer be allowed from today on to create any new money, any new, bank deposits, bank credit, for the purpose of facilitating consumer consumption. So no more student loans, car loans, mortgages, lines of credit, credit cards, installment plans, etc. If the government did that, it would become evident very, very quickly that there is in fact a gap. And both the economy would suffer and consumers would suffer. Consumers would not be able to get all the goods and services which the addition of consumer loans allows them to access, and businesses would go, retailers would go without sales. Some of them would go bankrupt. They'd have to lay people off, and you'd have a massive economic slowdown. So, you know, if there isn't a gap, why is consumer credit so necessary just to keep the thing running?
I think that would definitely prove it conclusively, and it wouldn't take long. Within a couple of days, I think everything would stop functioning. Do you have any thoughts on that, Andre?
It would take maybe 2 3 days. Usually it is Saturday, Sunday, because they would do this on Friday night. They would close the market, and on Monday, like in 1929, you would have the crash and a depression. And then you would have you had food bank, food stamp, whatever you want. But you know, politicians, they're not doing this today because they get their share of the profit of the system. They would still eat caviar and drink champagne. It's up to a certain point. They cannot crash the system. First of all, maybe they would be shot by bankers because it's the bankers who controls the economy. They don't call them bankster for nothing. And it's not it's the financial cartel. I will go back to, it was last year, you know, when those 10 MPs were supposed, some 10 MPs in the parliament were accused of colluding with the Chinese. And the 3-word slogan was name the names, just name the names. I want names. I just don't want an expression. Who are those bankers? Who are those people? The name. If we have the name, we can draw a good diagram of those people who control the economy, and we can pressure them. Because actually, like I was saying, was referring to Zuckerberg, whatever, all those, what they call elite, which I always put quoting mark because I don't believe that they are elite. I think they're parasite. They're always very, you know, they're always pushing moral behavior on ordinary people, but they're so filthy rich that they don't even know what they're doing with their money. They're completely useless people. On that point, Yuval Noah Harari, which is supposed to be a Israeli historian, said the useless eater. They are the useless eater. We could get rid of 1% of this population of this planet, and maybe it would work much better. Let's be honest. Up to a certain point, this is a war, class war. It never was different. It was always a class war, the rich against the poor. It's funny because in Russia, my wife, she always says there are 4 classes in Russia. You have very rich, poor, and very poor. There's no middle class. Doesn't exist. And when you arrive at this, and you arrive at a point where you have feudalism. But I would say feudalism, at least you had a landlord who was taking care of you. He was feeding you. You had a house, you had a roof. He was taking care of the elderly people because they had a moral code. We don't have this today in what they call neoliberalism. It's the law of the jungle. And up to a certain point, we need a strategy with a lot of measure to change this system. And unfortunately, we will arrive at a tipping point where people will say, okay, I had enough. I have enough. I will not comply anymore. And we are arriving at this moment.
So we have a few questions now from Payman Ascari. So I'm going to bring one up. Question for Oliver. You said military should not be handed over to private sectors. Why is that?
Well, you've got, you know, the phenomenon of market failure, right? The market, contrary to Whig propaganda, there are certain things that the market is not good for a variety of reasons. And national defense is one of them. You've got, I mean, we live in this country, right? We're in Canada. How would it work if certain people in the country want to hire private contractors to defend the country, and other people either don't want to pay for it or can't pay for it? You've got the problem of freeloaders, don't you? You know, and then of course people will say, well, I'm not going to hire private contractors to defend the country if other people aren't going to pay for it. Why should I? And then the whole thing collapses. So I think there are certain public goods that the market is not very well at supplying, and for various reasons. This is widely recognized in economics. If you want to, I mean, what's the counterexample? I suppose in Somalia, you've got warlords who protect certain parts of the country, uh, not the whole country, but then you've got competing warlords, and that's another problem too. If you try to outsource it to private contractors, well, this one is going to compete with that one, and what if there's conflict between them? And it's just it's anarchy. So I don't think that suggestion is a reasonable one.
Yeah, you wouldn't want robust competition in that industry. Could you imagine the cola wars if they were armed? Coke and Pepsi?
Yeah, well, you
So,
can look at the history of let's say the United States. If you look at the robber barons and the Wild West, and I think Douglas he makes the observation that at a certain time in history, in the history of the United States, in Chicago, for example, where you had the mobs, some of the banks had turrets and they had like machine guns. You know, um, I don't think that's the kind of society that most people would want to live in.
I agree with that. Do you have any thoughts on that question, Andre?
Well, that's actually the society we live in. First of all. Second of all, come on, the military business. A private company will seek its profit, nothing else. So you'll do what? You'll create wars to increase your profit or your dividend or your revenue. Look at the United States. They're losing against Iran. They have $1 trillion of budget per year. They're losing against a country that is 10 times smaller in terms of demography. United States is they had their hats beaten so badly that they are completely in a state of shock. The stock are depleted, and now it's even companies, private companies, they ask more money. You have 30-40% of corruption in those companies. So for each dollar, you have 40 cents that goes away that would never go into the military domain. I will not use business domain. Sovereignty is the prerogative of the state or a group of people which elect representative. Outside of that, no, you can outsource maybe some production of it, but you have to control the means of production. If you don't do this, you will end up with company will compete against each other. Compare the model with Russia. Russia, it's a top-down economy. It was always like that. It's based on an authoritarian model. We can say, oh, we have democracy here. We don't have democracy here. If we say they don't have, we don't have it here either. So you look at the model in Russia. Why it works so well? Because they are integrated. I can guarantee you there's lots of problem in Russia, but they are integrated. Companies that are working for the military complex, they comply. They don't have the choice. They produce, and it is the government who's project manager. Not so it's you cannot outsource. Also, in a military environment, if you have people who are doing their military services, they do it because there's a sense of duty. I go back to moral again. They want to protect their values, their identity. They want to protect their territory. So they will go and do their military services. Else you will have what? Mercenaries. Money drives everything. I think in a way, you cannot just ask private businesses to control your sovereignty.
I don't know, Andre. I think Trump actually declared the war in Iran won. I think he said they won it again. This is the 42nd time he's declared.
Exactly. I think he will go up to 47. He's the 47th president.
That's right.
There you go.
Five more. We still have 5 weeks of suffering, and then it will end.
I wonder what the poly market odds are on that one. So with that said, I have good news, gentlemen. We have Bob Liori, so we should be good for questions. Can the price income gap be calculated using the existing system of national accounts published by Statistics Canada? So we'll start with you, Oliver.
Yes, I think it can be done. And there actually are some attempts to assess the nature of the price income gap under the existing system in the United States, in Australia, where social creditors have looked at the statistics that are available, and they've been able to come to an estimate as to how large the gap is. So I don't think that there'd be much difficulty at all, and if more information is required, I'm sure that with all the tools available at our disposal at this point in history, it should be easier than ever before to determine the size of the gap and to do it even in real time.
It makes sense to me. Do you have anything to add to that, Andre?
I like the concept of real time. And the idea of having an extremely powerful tool is extraordinary. Then who's managing those tools? Statistics Canada. It's like politician. I would not trust them with any type of statistics of modernization. I wrote an essay in 2018 sharing knowledge, and I was saying in my essay, well, people, they use model as reality. Statistics are not supposed to hide reality. And today we can talk about inflation. We go back to the topic, inflation. Oh, the Bank of Canada controls inflation. And you go on Radio-Canada or CBC every 3 months, they say, oh, inflation now in Canada is 3.4%. It is controlled based on what? When I see the fluctuation of the price at the pump, do they include, or sometimes they include the price of gas, sometimes not. The basic basket of food, they calculate it, sometimes they don't. They play with it. You also, with powerful tools, you need people who are skilled to use those tools. And I actually, to answer the question of Bob Lior, I would say no. Replace all those bureaucrats with competent people, and maybe we can use the tool. But even then, I am skeptical.
I think honestly, we would have to usher in an era of hyper transparency. I don't know if we would have citizens groups potentially observe some of the auditing of these bodies under this model. I think that would seemingly make sense. But it's funny what you said, Andre. I've been listening to the central banker Richard Werner speak a lot, and he references this. He says a lot of our current systems are based on a logocentric ethos, like it's looking at it from mathematical models. And if you've got a faulty mathematical model, it's not reflecting empirical. And he kind of contrasts the difference between a logocentric view and empirical data. And it right away, when I'm listening to him say it, I'm thinking of Douglas. It's like that's what Douglas is saying. He wants this to reflect reality precisely, as opposed to these kind of convoluted mathematical models that clearly aren't reflecting the accurate data.
Well, 2021, how many people in Great Britain were supposed to die of COVID? 60 million, according to the model. 60 million? I say, that's why when I saw this number, I said they're completely lunatics. They take the model for the reality. A model is there. I have a small anecdote. I was working with an engineer, an engineer who was managing a power dam or a river. And he made a presentation one day, and they were doing simulation to see if you would be able to sustain a huge flood. And the engineer, a brilliant man, he said the manager should not know when he's tested. Because if he knows that he's tested, after day 1, he will act in a way to make the water flow after day 2, after day 3. He said if he doesn't know that a flood will arrive at day 3, he will not anticipate his behavior. And he said the manager has to be tested with the model. Those people who are using models and statistics, they never test their model in real time. They don't want, not that they cannot, they have the tools to do it. They don't want to do it because they know their model will just crash. Why do you use a prototype with a Formula One driver? You think the man goes there and say, okay, you come back with the steering wheel around your head. It means that we did not design the car properly. The man is paralyzed. You don't test the model like this. You have to test the model up until the point it works. And you always have to adapt it. Oliver mentioned something important. We have the tool to monitor them and to adapt with the feedback that we would have. They don't know how to work with those models. They just use them, and after that, they will implement some policies based on fiction.
I think modeling is one thing, but I think when it comes to raw data collection, I think, for example, the bureaucrats in the halls of Statistics Canada are quite competent. I think if we get false information, it's political more than anything else. And under Douglas social credit, a lot of the political incentives to distort or exaggerate or understate things, that would disappear. So you'd free the bureaucracy to actually do their jobs properly. We want accurate information. We really do want accurate information. We don't want to distort things, to paint a certain political picture.
Well, actually, I saw this often. I'm sorry, the data are related to your bonus. So if you don't adjust the data, and I've seen this in my career, if you don't adjust the data, sorry, you don't have your bonus. Again, money incitative.
Yeah.
Money drives behavior.
Yeah. So it's a feature of the current system. Yeah.
So we have another one from Payman Ascari. What is the DSC view towards mortgages? Would they abolish it, or would it be wrapped up into the gap? Start with you, Oliver.
Yeah, mortgages are quite fascinating. I mean, you could still, under Douglas social credit, you could still borrow money for the purpose of more expensive items, cars or houses. But that borrowing would not involve the creation of additional money. So one of the reasons that houses are so expensive has to do with the fact that banks are able to create money against, in most cases, two incomes. And as time goes on, the debt that people owe on these mortgages, that sort of becomes the baseline for what houses cost. But if you say, okay, from now on, there's no more debt creation for the purpose of purchasing mortgages or purchasing houses, then the price of housing would fall substantially. And from the point of view of those of us who see houses primarily as a place to live in and not as an investment that we're expecting to quote unquote appreciate, that would be fine, because it doesn't matter so much whether a house in a certain area, a house of a certain type, whether it costs $1 million, $10 million, or $10,000, right? If you sell the house, you for what it's worth in the market, then you're able to buy an equivalent house in an equivalent area at the same general price. So it's sort of one for one, right? So but unfortunately, because of the economic insecurity and the artificial financial pressure to which we're subject, the whole mortgage thing, especially the last 30-40 years, it's been another one of those treadmill money chasing exercises where there's no real end to it. It just keeps going up and up and up until perhaps there's a crash. But mortgages has been one of the ways that the system has been filling the gap, right? Because somebody might sell a house that has appreciated, quote unquote. Maybe they bought it for 200,000. Now it's $1 million. Maybe they want to downsize, so they buy a house for 500,000. And then they have $500,000 to play with, to buy a car with, or to buy other goods and services. And so that money filters back into the economy as purchasing power. So the whole thing is really quite insidious on multiple levels. It's kind of like a madhouse on wheels, really, the whole thing. But here we are.
So before I hand it over to Andre, we have about 120 people watching. I can't overstate how deboosted we are. It's phenomenal. I have 30,000 followers. I used to get 1,000 live viewers when I would do these shows. Considering some of the topics we're talking about, I really think that's what's getting us deboosted. So I will appeal to you, if you could please share this stream, even send it to someone that you think might enjoy this kind of content. It really helps us out tremendously. So with that said, Andre, do you have any thoughts on this question?
I have a lot of thoughts about mortgage. First of all, let's talk about reverse mortgage. It's something that appeared, I would say 5, maybe 7 years ago. Baby boomers. Okay, I don't like the category, but I will just use it just for convenience. But reverse mortgage. I'm 65. I sell my house, $1 million, or I downsize like Oliver mentioned, because my children are gone. Okay, that's okay. I understand. But I can arrive at 65 and I can go to the bank and say, hey, wait a second, I want a reverse mortgage. Okay, we will give you upfront $1 million now. Spend it like you want. But when you die, we repossess the house. So it's a way to deprive your children of their heritage. That's the first thing. What I said, and I said that you were there, John-Paul, this week. Us peasants, we leave in our will a mortgage. The rich people, they leave in their mortgage assets, and they become richer and richer and richer. And today, if I would like to leave the house to my daughter, I will pay 40% of equity tax on it. First of all, that's robbery. That's robbery. The second thing, if I die, I will take my daughter will pay maybe 35% of the value of the house before even possessing the house. And then she doesn't have the money, so she will have to go to the bank and again take another mortgage to pay for the house that she inherited. This system is full of flaws. It's full of booby trap, and we all fall in it all the time because they sell us wealth when we are completely bankrupt. If tomorrow I decide to take a reverse mortgage, I have the value of my house, $1 million. Oh, $1 million, I can live very well for 10 years. My life expectancy is about 15 years, maybe a little bit more. So I will, like I say to my wife, let's go to the Riviera 1 week. We spend $100,000. It's 1 year of income. This is completely ludicrous. It's completely ridiculous. But they sell it. They sell it like something that is normal. We are in this era of new normal. And yes, in a system, you have to be able to acquire some credit. We go back to the debt-free credit. A young couple who needs a start in life, society should help them, not put a burden on them, because they will be discouraged. They will not have the income to procreate or to have a family. And then after that, what they will do, 30, 35, we will be all tenants. The tendency is that everybody will be tenants in 5, 10 years, 15 years, because the middle class, what we call the middle class, 1945 up until, let's say, 2020, the middle class is shrinking, but slowly but surely. And one day it will not exist. And then we will become again slaves.
So with that said, we have another one from Bob Lior. What financial information would the National Credit Office require from retailers to administer the national discount? So we'll start with you, Oliver.
Well, from retailers, they'd have to have a record of all the sales that they're making and what they're selling stuff for. Of course, the idea behind the national discount is that there would be a certain percentage discount across the board. It could be 10%, 15%, 20%. And in order to make sure that works, depending on how the model is set up, because there are different ways that this can be done. Jim Schroeder, whom you interviewed the other day, he prefers the model which Douglas talked about, where instead of reimbursing the retailer, the consumer would pay full price, and then the consumer would get the discount. right? So I think the main thing would be to make sure that people, retailers, are not sort of taking advantage of the system in some way in order to fill their own pockets at the expense of the operational functionality of the system. And so you know, you would have to have some sort of oversight. But you know, there's already oversight with GST and PST and so on and so forth. And so I don't think that it's either would be intrusive or that it would be particularly difficult.
And do you have any thoughts on this, Andre?
Well, Oliver mentioned GST and provincial sales tax. Yeah. When they were playing with this, we put the GST, we take it out, we put the companies were going ballistic. They were saying they all screw the system all the time, and we have to reprogram our software. And you need stability in the system. And to have those data, we have all the tools to do it. I go back again to who's operating those tools, who's using those tools. If you people that are skilled in position of power or at the right place, you will be able to have this type of data, and then you will be able to adjust it according to the balance between cost of production and consumption. If you have to give a discount to a retailer, or like Oliver mentioned, to a customer, it has to be fair without speculation. Now we see sometimes, we always see this, sale, rebate, liquidation sale, 50% off. Then you realize that they boost their price and they cut 50% from the price that is boosted. They play with the system all the time. Everybody's screwing everybody, not everybody, but the majority, because we don't have a moral compass. We just say, if I don't do it, somebody else will do it. And why we are in this situation? Scarcity, gap, anxiety, and we tell ourselves, I have to protect myself and my family. I don't say people will rob, but it's legal. There was a phrase many, many years ago, I'm responsible for something that bad behavior, but I will not apologize. Wait a second, you're responsible? Are you accountable? If it is a criminal act, you should be prosecuted, judged, and if you are found guilty, you should be jailed. And many, many people who are in position of power, they say, oh, I am responsible, but I'm not accountable. And there's no mechanism to prosecute them. So moral code is essential to be able to implement a fair financial system. They go together. They go together.
Yeah, one of the things that Douglas suggested too is, you'd have to, as a company, you'd have to sign up for the national discount. And so if a company was audited and we found out that they were, keeping two sets of books, or they're somehow manipulating information, they would henceforth they would be disqualified from the discount, and they'd be subject then to public opprobrium, because people would go there and say, wait a moment, why, the discount this period is 20%, how come you don't offer it? What are they going to say? Because we were fudging the books or something. So there'd be an incentive to be honest. And of course, if we're eliminating all the artificial scarcity and pressure, the incentive to the current incentive to be dishonest, that's going to evaporate.
Well, you can also refer to Shylock. You take your pound of flesh, but not 1 ounce, not one less. So cut your slice and don't make a mistake, because you will pay for it.
Right.
So that's
right.
accountability. You
That's
take right. There's a lot of people today, they want the job, they want the income, they want the big salary, but they are not accountable when they make a mistake. That goes with it. The job, the accountability goes with the responsibility or the job.
I think too, there would be a lot of details that would need to be ironed out. This would be implemented incrementally. It's not like overnight we're going to shift everything and it's just going to work flawlessly. There would be, some time to adjust and to monitor and then refine certain elements and aspects of it. So I mean,
I would say, John-Paul, 2 weeks to flatten the economic system.
There you go. I like that. That's the title of the episode. So we got one more question. This is from Payman Ascari. Oliver, you spoke positively of feudalism last week. Can you share your thoughts on that system, please? I don't remember you speaking positively unless it was to contrast comparing it to today's system and kind of that it's not much different.
I don't know that I was speaking positively of feudalism as such, but he's probably thinking of some things I said in favor of, let's say, the aristocratic system as it existed even into the 20th century, as you see, in Downton Abbey, which I think is basically what he's getting at. I'm not saying that that's a perfect system or an ideal system. I think the point I wanted to make was it's, and Douglas makes this point too, that in the past, yes, okay, the aristocrats held a certain position and they benefited from the arrangement, but it was a two-way street. They also had responsibilities for the people under them, and it wasn't all about the bottom line or a monetary result. So as you see in Downton Abbey, and I don't think it's fiction, I think this actually happened, where the aristocrats went out of their way, even in certain cases suffered loss because maybe one of their tenants was sick or somebody needed help with something. Like it was more like a family, right? So there was a solidarity there. If you compare that with the pure capitalist system, there's no solidarity, right? Or if there is, it's sort of in spite of the system, not because of the system. This is especially true in certain jurisdictions where, which I've experienced myself in my own work history, where there are no countervailing influences, either customary or judicial, legal. And basically, you are expected, I mean, it's not stated overtly, but you're expected to go along with whatever power demands, no matter how dishonest, how irrational, how unjust, because they have the power. And if you want the money, you will do what you're told, and they don't owe you anything, right? This is sort of the attitude. It's a dog eat dog sort of situation. And I don't think that in Tory Britain, I don't think that was the culture. That culture was destroyed by this expanding Whiggish, money is lord of all type of system. And a lot of aristocrats, because they couldn't pay taxes on land and so on and so forth, they didn't have the revenue to do that. They ended up losing their property, and of course the people that depended on them then had to fend for themselves. I don't think that's progress necessarily.
I never really thought of it, but I think you're right. hearing it kind of fleshed out like that, it makes sense. Do you have any thoughts to add to this, Andre?
You fall in my let's say my fruit tail, in the sense that let's not mix feudalism with Middle Age. We always refer to, thank God I studied literature and not economy. Middle Age were not Dark Age. You had monks who were carrying knowledge, because most of the population was illiterate. But you had a great structure, which was the Christian structure, and they were respecting the order of aristocracy. Oliver mentioned something important. Aristocrat, they had the duty. They were fulfilling their duty. And you arrive at a moment where people were well treated. Of course, you had bad landlord. We have bad capitalist people. Maybe, I don't know if it exists, good capitalists, but let's say you have some. You had a system, a structure of system that was working based on three order: the church, the aristocracy, and the people. And there was a balance between those structures, like a triangle. Of course, you were having some internal conflict, war between region or landlord or prince or king. But up to a certain point, it was like quite stable. People knew their place. It's quite reassuring sometimes. You ask yourself, what is freedom? Well, if I know my place and I'm well treated, it's not because I'm not in jail. I can express myself. Feudalism has a very bad reputation, because when we talk about it, we always refer to the bad side of it. Of course, why do you think people were drinking wine and hydromel? Because they could be poisoned by water every day. But you go up to a certain point, and half of the food was rotten because they didn't have means of conservation food, and it was quite different, And the Palais of Versailles, for about 400 people who were living in Versailles, there was one toilet. Try to picture that. So, of course, when we think about feudalism, the idea I think Oliver was mentioning is that people had more leisure time. You had guild, you had the knowledge that was transferred from the master to the apprentice, and they had, like a collective. I will not say union. The guild were, a group of a master artisan. You had great acknowledgement during Middle Age. Let's not confuse this with feudalism. And you can refer to Tolstoy, because Tolstoy, when he wanted to free his serf, they were against it. They were saying, well, okay, thank you, master, but what do? I don't have land. I don't have nothing. You're a free man. Go on the road and you're a free man. It doesn't work like that. Oliver's mentioning Downton Abbey. I think that was the last generation of people who knew that their duty was important. If you want to have servant, you have to treat them well. The concept of master and servant is not necessarily pejorative. I can refer to our audience to a book that is extraordinary. It is The Colonizer and the Colonized from Albert Mimi. He was a Moroccan mathematician, and he was talking about Algeria at the time. But I read this book and I was asking myself, what about French Canadian in Quebec? Colonizer and the colonized. It's never black and white. It's never black and white. You have people who benefit from both sides. Again, I go to the simple aspect of society. If you have a good moral code, if you are in a position of power, you will not abuse it.
I think too, the way we utilize the term freedom in contemporary society, like it's not as clear and defined as we like to think. I heard a lot of people saying with Iran, when the narrative was kind of, oh, we got to free the Iranian people and bring them freedom. It's like, bring them the American version of freedom. What is that? That's like degeneracy now. It's degeneracy and debt slavery. Is that freedom? Are you free under that model? Because I could make a very coherent argument that you're not. You're just enslaved to different ideals, essentially. And that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I just should add too that somebody can check on Wikipedia or ask ChatGPT or Grok. I think feudalism in the strictest sense probably only applies to like the 8th or 9th or 10th century. And that what you had at the high Middle Ages, before right before the Renaissance was something else, which not properly defined as feudalism. So and of course what they had, let's say in the 20th century, that's with the remnants of aristocratic way of life and responsibilities wasn't really, it's not feudalism either.
So it's like the post-Enlightenment, we started to lose some of that a little bit.
Exactly.
Like Voltaire, with the introduction of Voltaire and some of these post-Enlightenment ideals, you started to see that duty type of a situation go back. So with that said, we're towards the end, gentlemen. Let's do some final thoughts. I'll start with you, Oliver. Do you have any ending thoughts?
Well, inflation, a lot of people complain about inflation. It's a problem sort of that never seems to be solved. Of course, according to academics and the people that run the current system, a certain amount of inflation is actually good, right? They talk about the target, the 2% target. And I think it's tolerated because they don't say this, but it's because it helps to inflate away past debts. And that gives oxygen to the system so we can borrow more in the future without it sort of overwhelming us. It's another one of those things which is a bug, but in terms of the system's longevity, it becomes a feature. And Douglas Social Credit says, well, we don't actually we shouldn't have inflation. Inflation's not a good thing. And if the financial system accurately reflected reality, as technology improves and we become more efficient, the costs of things should actually be falling.
That's what you would definitely expect to see. Do you have any parting words, Andre?
Well, the mission of the central bank, any central bank, is to control inflation, let's say under 2%. And I would say just eliminate the last word. The purpose or the mission of the central bank is to control. And when you stop there, you ask yourself, well, control who? Because with this tool or this weapon, you can change a lot of behaviors.
Makes sense. So we are at the end. We have about 130 people watching live. I really need you guys to do me a favor and share this stream. Simply just share it. Click the like, all that stuff. It's very advantageous for what we're endeavoring to do. And that's it. 2 weeks to flatten the economic system. We do this every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern, and we shall see you next week. Cheers.